Alrighty, happy Monday, everybody. Good morning. Well, it's Monday for me, Tuesday for you. So, the district wanted me to remind you that throughout our time while we're e-learning, or remote learning as they call it, that you must still adhere to the acceptable use for technology expectations that you signed in the beginning of the year, as well as the code of conduct expectations. Okay? We'll be able to continue to do this as long as everybody remembers to meet these expectations. You can see these expectations and guidelines on the website. So last week, we talked a lot about the United States kind of on the sidelines at the beginning of World War II, okay? And for most of this, the United States was neutral, right? But we saw that FDR was going to continuously try to work with the British, specifically Winston Churchill, who was his friend. He's going to continue to try to work with them and supply them with foodstuff, weapons, boats, ships. And what we saw when France was defeated was the Congress said, uh-oh, this could mean trouble for us. We didn't expect France to fall. So they increased the defense spending budget. Okay, so this emboldens FDR, and FDR is able to start producing a little bit more industrial goods so that the United States could be ready for war. And then what happens? Well, Pearl Harbor. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor because of the United States threatening to cut off oil to Japan because of their militarist and imperialist activities by conquering large parts of Asia, specifically China. And what we're going to see is, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, American attitudes toward the war is going to shift substantially. Okay, instead of saying, oh, we should be neutral, we shouldn't be getting involved in another war, just like in the First World War. Well, now everybody's angry. Instead of saying that, they're going to say, oh, we got to go to war, we got to fight the Japanese. Okay, so FDR signs the declaration of war. He urges Congress, please, please, please pass a declaration of war so that I can sign it. Okay, this picture on here is FDR signing it. And it's important to note that initially, FDR is only declaring war, and so is the United States, on Japan. Okay, he didn't say anything about Italy or Germany. Okay, but unfortunately, because of the pact that Italy, Germany, and Japan had, once the United States goes to war with Japan, Germany and Italy also declare war on the United States. So, FDR's war message, very, very famous, December 11th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Okay, this is such an important moment in American history, and I mean, you know this. You've seen the movies, you've heard of it before, probably. You've heard of the USS Arizona being sunk. All of these things are going to push us into the war. This is the spark, okay? So, the only person who would vote against the declaration of war was, do we remember what her name was? She also voted against war during World War I. That's right. Jeannette Rankin, okay? And like I was saying, in accordance with the Tripartite Pact, Germany and Italy declare war on the U.S., so in turn, we declare war on them. And so initially, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States is going to go, uh-oh, there's a lot of people in this country who are Japanese Americans, okay? They're still American citizens, but they have a Japanese background or a Japanese ethnicity. They could be a threat to us. They could be spies. They could be sympathetic for Japan just because their ancestors were Japanese. So FDR says, all right, this is how we're going to deal with it. He signs Executive Order 9066. Very important. Write this down. Probably going to be on a quiz. Executive Order 9066 removes more than 110,000 Japanese nationals, which are people who are still citizens of Japan but are in the United States for whatever reasons, and as well as the Japanese Americans, so the people who happen to be Japanese but are American citizens. Okay, FDR says, let's take all these people, we'll move them away from the West Coast, and we'll move them into internment camps. Okay. About 2/3 of those who were moved into these internment camps were citizens. If we were in school right now, I would have showed you the really cool picture book that I have of the internment camps from the point of view of a child. Very, very good book, very short, and it's a picture book. All right, it shows this kid who doesn't understand what's happening. People are being racist towards him when they were fine just a couple weeks ago. And now they're being asked to leave everything behind. Okay, too bad if you can't pay your bills on your business. Too bad if, you need the money. You're going to these internment camps. Bring as much as you can carry. It's time to go. And just like we saw in World War I, with all that fervor against the Germans, we're going to see the same thing against the Nazis. Or excuse me, the Nazis. We're going to see the same thing against the Japanese. Okay, so in World War I, we said, yeah, liberty cabbage. Okay, Germans are evil. Well, now we're going to do the same thing to the Japanese. Okay, in California, there's a long history of anti-Japanese sentiment. And these Nisi are the American Japanese Americans who are of Japanese descent. Okay, they're going to be falsely accused of helping plan Pearl Harbor. However, there's no evidence of sabotage or espionage that's ever found. Okay, you could see how racist the poster is to the right. People are just going to jump on this, okay, because what happens when we're in a time of national crisis? You got it. Everybody starts getting a little racist. All right, World War I, go against the Germans. World War II, go against the Japanese. Okay, 9/11, go against Muslims. All of these things are going to start seeing an uptick. Okay, we're going to start seeing that racism and prejudice is going to jump, okay, in terms of rates of the people who are exhibiting these negative ideas and stereotypes and, hate speech. Inside the camps, the Japanese Americans were forced to sell their homes, businesses, and properties. They lost an estimated $2 billion. Okay, now that's not just a couple families, that's overall. All of the Japanese Americans who were sent to these camps. They were told, hey, because 9066 was passed, you have 48 hours to liquidate, which means sell your possessions or your business, and then you're going to these camps. These camps were pretty bad, okay? They were in the middle of nowhere. They had barbed wire enclosures, which meant basically you were not allowed to leave, or you would get hurt or killed if you tried to. You were in barracks with no cots or no plumbing. There was a meager food budget, so people were being malnourished. And since these camps were usually in the middle of nowhere, very, 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 very horrible winters would hit. Okay, because they're in the middle of nowhere, they really have no protection from the elements. So these ice cold winters are blowing through, these burning hot summers are rolling through. All right, so they're at the mercy of these different elements of nature, and it's going to take a toll on a lot of people. Okay, Manzanar is one of the most infamous internment camps. Okay, it's located in California. It's the best known, like I said. It held nearly 12,000 internees, okay, which means Japanese Americans. Okay, internees means people who were in the internment camps, so kind of put those words together. This place was extremely susceptible because of its geographical location to extremes in climate, and it was not closed until 1945. So bombing of Pearl Harbor happens in 1941, and Manzanar, the last internment camp, is closed in 1945. That's 4 years some of these people spent in these camps. Just because they were Japanese. They were still citizens. They were still usually not doing anything. They owned businesses. They were doing well. And suddenly, because a different country with the same ethnicity bombs the United States, we say, well, you're Japanese. You must be sympathetic. You're going to a camp. So, Korematsu versus the United States in 1942. Korematsu is the name of a guy who refused to obey the relocation order. Okay, he went to court and appealed the conviction on constitutional grounds. However, the Supreme Court said that, of course, the Supreme Court, they always side with what the president does during a time of war. The Supreme Court says, well, this order 9066 that FDR signed, it's valid. Okay, he's allowed to do that in the time of war. It's okay that you can all just, have your rights violated, just like we saw with the Espionage and Sedition Acts. So, Korematsu versus the United States ruled that internment camps are permissible and allowed to continue. It wouldn't be until 1984 that this decision would be vacated and basically thrown out, okay, because it was shown that the government withheld evidence in the first trial. Okay, so this would be thrown out. There would be reparations that would have to be paid to these Japanese Americans. Now, other groups were also interned. Okay, German Americans and nationals and Italian Americans and nationals. So citizens and non-citizens alike were all thrown into camps. Okay, specifically at Ellis Island. More than 10,000 Germans and 3,000 Italians were interred. Okay, and these camps were similar to those of the Japanese Americans. However, once again, there's no evidence of espionage or treason. So, that was Japanese internment. Now we're going to get into some of the initial stages, what we're going to do on the home front, what we're going to do at home to get ready to fight the war next week. So, the Atlantic Charter is a meeting between FDR and Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister for the United Kingdom. So they meet aboard the USS Augusta, okay? And the point of the Atlantic Charter, which is the name of the meeting, you need to know this, very important, star. They said we need to set out our war aims. If we conquer Germany, are we going to keep that land? What's the point of this war? Are we defending ourselves? Are we trying to liberate France? Are we trying to conquer more territories? Are we trying to expand our empires? And there was also a discussion charter for the creation of the United Nations. So remember, after World War I, the League of Nations is created. The United States does not join. At this point, the League of Nations basically falls apart. Okay, one of the biggest members, France, is no longer a part of it because their government's in shambles and their countries basically collapsed. So the League of Nations falls apart, and so they say after the war we will create the United Nations. Okay, this will be non-negotiable, and we're going to do this because we don't want to see another war. We made our mistake the First World War. We're not going to do it again. So, on the war on the home front. On the eastern coast, which is where we are, New Jersey, the whole eastern coast in the Atlantic Ocean, the German Wolf Pack, which is another name for U-boat attacks. All right, the U-boats would come in and attack American ships, trading vessels, cruisers, transports. They would come in, they would destroy any of them, as many as they could. They would destroy a great deal of them. Okay, and this was called Operation, bear with me, Paukenschlag, okay? I'm sure Lucas could do a better job saying it than I can, but he's not here with me right now, so here you go. So, the East Coast is essentially undefended, okay? Most of our Navy was in Pearl Harbor, all right? It was destroyed by the Japanese during Pearl Harbor, and so our Navy's kind of in disarray. We need to kind of rebuild. We're not really in a position where we can launch a naval warfare. All right. So the U-boats over the course of less than a year sank over 500 ships in the U.S. defense zone, which means the waters of the U.S. And the U.S. 10th Fleet would finally be called against the U-boats in the Western Atlantic, and they finally sank 65 U-boats within 6 months. Okay, so this ended the war on the United States home front. Okay, so we didn't see any more U-boats coming into the East Coast attacking American ships. And so we get to women on the home front. Okay, women, especially feminists, are going to be talking a lot in this time. And they're going to be looking at this time period and saying, well, did women advance or were they kind of thrown back? Okay, was it because of war or was it because of the legitimate belief that women can do more? Okay, so they took many jobs over for servicemen, most notably in the heavy industry. So, like creating tanks, ships, bullets, weapons, uh, all that kind of stuff. The heavy industry, the metals, the steel. Okay, the women are going to take over these jobs. Some would join the military as nurses or typist clerks. And this altered family life, okay, because it brought several drawbacks. It would, the women couldn't stay at home anymore with the kids. Uh, childcare became an issue. Um, Women were suddenly the bread earners. Okay, they were the ones with the incomes. The husbands were away at war. Women became in charge of the house. And so in the military, the Women's Army Corps, okay, WAC, WAC, all right, remember WAC? Write that down, star it, very important. I will have that on a quiz. WAC, the Women's Army Corps, was created for women, obviously. So General George C. Marshall wanted to use women in non-combative positions, so tech people, clerks, security, and so Congress created the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps in 1942, so WAAC, WAC, okay, and it was renamed the Women's Army Corps, WAC. Right? Women were asked to be part of this, support the war effort in any way you can. Okay, now you're going to be a part of the military. However, on the industrial side of things, women were encouraged to work in defense plants, creating bombs, bullets, shells, ships, planes, tanks, all that kind of stuff. The ones who wouldn't work or who were at home because they didn't need to work because their husbands didn't leave, they were growing victory gardens just like we were in World War I. They were recycling for the war effort, old rubber, materials, tires, cans, all of that good stuff. Donate all of your metals to the war. We'll make them into bullets and ships, and we can really mobilize. Okay, but they still earned less money than male workers. Why? Because history is unfair to women. So then we get into the Office of War Information. Okay, remember all of those organizations from World War I we talked about. These organizations were created to help the government mobilize, help the government maintain a wartime existence. Okay, so the Office of War Information coordinated the release of war news, promoted patriotism, and tried to recruit women into factory work. We need as many women as we can. Okay, and they spread propaganda, and different propaganda programs were placed abroad so that, the Americans would look good, Americans would continue to support the war, and those abroad would continue to support us. Okay, so the Office of War Information, basically propaganda, okay, promoting patriotism, recruiting people to fight in the war, work for the war. Okay, and this becomes the voice of America. Okay, people start to say, wow, the Office of War Information is someone we need to listen to. All right, we're very interested in this war because it has national interests at stake. So we need to know what's happening. And of course, we get to one of my favorite people and one of Miss Tarnowski's favorite people, Rosie the Riveter. All right, she's a symbol of the working women during the war. All right, she's a strong woman with a bandana on her head. She was based on a factory worker, Rose Monroe. Okay, Miller and Rockwell both created the iconic Rosie images. Oops. And feminists today are even looking back and saying, well, did Rosie the Riveter really help us, or was it kind of just a ploy to get women in the workforce for a short amount of time? In other words, was it meant to promote the idea of a strong woman, or is it meant to promote the idea that women should just get into the workforce until the war is over? Okay, so did it advance women? Not sure. So, the Axis powers, Japan, Italy, Germany, they underestimate the power of American production. Okay, Europe always underestimates how quickly America produces weapons and materials. Many factories and businesses converted to war production. So, like right now, what we're doing with the COVID-19, General Motors, which is a car company, is changing their factories to create hand sanitizer. This is being done in there was one place in Kentucky or Tennessee it made whiskey, and now it's making hand sanitizer. They're converting these big factory spaces to produce things for war. Okay, And so new industries emerge. Okay, that idea of the arms industry that we talked about in World War One. Okay, output significantly increased. We start creating all of these Liberty ships, these ships that are massive. Okay, Liberty ships are not your typical ship. They're not an aircraft carrier. They're not a destroyer. They're usually cargo ships. They're developed by Henry Kaiser. Circle his name and star it. He is responsible for featuring welded hulls. Instead of having one piece of um, uh, metal that spanned the entire side of the boat, and if it got hit by a rocket, or not a rocket, a torpedo or something, you'd have to take the whole thing off because it wasn't attached in the middle. Now that we have welded parts, we can take that broken piece off and replace it. If there's a crack or a leak, we can take that piece off and replace it. It makes it cheaper. It makes it easier to function and easier to upkeep and less expensive. Okay. Many sections were prefabricated, meaning they were made in the factories. They were already ready to be made and placed on these ships. Okay, and by 1943, 3 entered service daily. So 3 whole ships were created every single day. Ford changes his factories and starts to create B-24 Liberator bombers, so airplanes that drop bombs. This would become the world's largest factory under one roof. It produced 14 aircraft per day as of August 1944. Okay, and you just see how quickly we're producing all of these materials. The War Production Board is put in charge of overseeing all of this. They're making sure the military has the resources it needs. Okay, food, weapons, supplies, all of that stuff, just like we had in the First World War. It directed industrial output, regulated wartime production, allocated raw materials, and organized scrap drives. Sorry about the typo with materials. It should be an A instead of an E. I just noticed that. The War Production Board is making sure the military is ready to go. You have scrap drives, okay, and these were organized by the War Production Board, WPB, and a lot of times you'd get donations of scrap metal, plastics, rubber to be used for the war. Okay, iron, aluminum, paper, and scrap drives became very popular. Okay, scrap drives were a great way to repurpose materials. All right, if we have something that we're just going to throw into the ocean or the landfill, why not donate it and use it for the war effort? The government used posters and publicity pictures of celebrities such as Rita Hayworth on the right, who's awesome, to encourage citizens to recycle scrap items. When we're financing the war, the United States would spend more than $321 billion. And remember, because of inflation, if you ever take an economics class, money was worth less than it is now. Things were charged for less than they are now. Today, we would have spent about $3 trillion. That is the equivalent. The national debt increases dramatically, and more Americans are required to pay income taxes. Okay, so we went down on that slump with the Great Depression. The war is going to bring America out of the Depression, but at the same time increase national debt. War bond sales were also brought back just from World War I. Okay, these war bonds were used to help finance the war. More than $185 billion worth were sold. They were bought by businesses, banks, civilians. Celebrities even helped with these war bonds. And the idea of the high interest rates was, if we give higher interest rates, that means we're going to give you more money in the long run. So there's more incentive to buy these bonds. Okay, so we see some more propaganda. Okay, don't let that shadow touch them. That's a swastika. Buy war bonds. Okay. Excuse me. Next, we have the Office of Price Administration, OPA. All right. This administration was in charge of limiting wartime inflation. Okay, what is inflation? We remember that. That means that the cost of goods increase. Okay, they established ceiling prices for many goods. Okay, they rationed scarce goods and many consumer staples. Okay, rationing stopped at the end of the war. So, like COVID-19 again today, Mr. Roebuck was telling me how expensive hand sanitizer was getting. Okay, the government saw that these things were happening. Okay, well now, I don't know, tires are more expensive because there's so few of them. Instead of charging $8 a tire, they're now $50 a tire. The job of the Office of Price Administration was to say, no, you cannot charge $50 per tire when they used to be $8. You can only charge up to $20. Okay, and the biggest thing was rationing. It was dissolved in 1947, and this is just an example of a ration book. In ration stamps, this was a very widely used way to protect resources. This was used around the world, most importantly in Britain. Okay, Victory Gardens made a comeback. We remember them. The government urged citizens to grow fruits and veg. It eased food shortages, and nearly 20 million started gardens again. Okay. The National War Labor Board, remember, we don't want to deal with labor disputes. All right, we're creating all of these things. There's bound to be labor strikes and labor issues. The National War Labor Board came in and would work with these labor unions. Okay, they'd work from the with the administrations to try to broker a deal so that things could keep being produced. They encouraged the no strike pledge. All right, we're at a time of war. We understand that you might think that conditions in the workplace are unfair, but it's necessary. Some wildcat strikes would still occur, though. People said, no, we're still humans. We still deserve basic rights. And one of my favorite topics, the Navajo code talkers, were used to transmit messages in the Pacific Theater. Okay, this is based on the Navajo language, something that the Japanese had never encountered. So instead of using the conventional codes that we use, like numbers, letters, the Navajo used a language that was not spoken frequently. Okay, this was a language that was dying out, and the Navajo Native Americans still remembered this language, so it became an excellent way to transmit messages. Okay, this code was never broken by the Japanese. After the war, servicemen, the GI Bill would be put into place. Okay, Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. This was an attempt to thwart a social and economic crisis. This stalled in Congress as the House and Senate hammered out a compromise. The bill provided for education and training, low-cost loans, unemployment benefits. Remember, when the soldiers from World War I first came back, their biggest issue was they were unemployed. They had no resources. The GI Bill was an attempt to, get a head start and protect the soldiers. All right, and that is our notes for the day. Sorry they were kind of long today. We had a lot to get through. Make sure you've been taking notes, submit your outlines on Google Classroom, and make sure on your notes you've written your 2 to 3 comments or questions. All right? Make sure you write a comment or question. It can be, wow, I didn't know that America was so organized right after the war. Wow, I didn't know how quickly production started. Or you can have questions like, were Victory Gardens effective? I'll answer all of these in the live chat tomorrow. Okay, and I will post the time of the live chat in Google Classroom so that everybody can see it. All right, make sure you submit your comments and questions, and I will speak with you all tomorrow. Have a great